So today I'll show you and I'll teach you exactly how to structure a complete upper body workout with calisthenics or body weight only. This is going to be a complete beginner's guide. I'm going to give you a checklist for your upper day that you can apply for your own training, and I'm also going to give you the best exercise for muscle growth. Before we get into the best exercise for each muscle group, I'm going to give you my upper body day checklist so you can structure your workout optimally, right? So a complete upper body day needs the following exercises: one chest pressing movement, one shoulder pressing movement, one or two lat movements, one upper back movement, one bicep isolation exercise, one tricep isolation, and one ab movement. If you have very little time, you can skip the last three. It will be fine. Your arms won't grow that optimally, but they'll still grow. At the end of the video, I'm going to give you a volume guide where I'm going to talk about exactly how many reps and sets you should do, and also speak a little bit about rest times, right? If you want a complete, personalized workout plan made by me, hit the link in my bio and join my community. Let's start with chest movements. So your chest works in pushing movements like push-ups or dips. And if you want to target your chest properly, you're going to have at least one of those in your program. Now, I would recommend you do the dip. I personally do only the ring dips, right? However, if you're a beginner, you should start with push-ups because most likely you still can't do dips yet, right? Push-ups, generally speaking, are a good exercise. And if you want to only do push-ups, you can also stick with push-ups. The problem is with push-ups that once you get stronger and you can do a lot of them, they kind of aren't challenging enough anymore. And you have to go to like really high reps in order to hit failure, right? However, if you still want to stick with push-ups, you can add deficits with parallels, or you can also do them on the dip bars, like put your feet basically on the dip bars behind you and then push in. Basically, you create like a deficit and that creates a bigger range of motion. Or you can add weight if you feel like adding weight is best, right? However, for those training only body weight, and if you're just starting out, start with push-ups, and then once you can do like 20, move on to dips. And I personally would recommend you stick with dips, right? Again, for dips goes the same thing. If you want to make it harder, either you go deeper, or what I would recommend you do is add rings. Get yourself a pair of rings, and trust me, you'll unlock a new level of chest growth, simply because you can stretch it out great at the bottom, and you can contract the chest at the top way better if you have rings. They just simply give you more freedom of movement, right? So let's move on to shoulders, right? Like I said at the beginning, you need one shoulder pressing movement. And that is very simply because shoulders are the area where most calisthenics guys or guys that train with body weight are just lacking, right? Because they don't train their shoulders properly and directly. They think that dips and push-ups hit the shoulder enough, and that's just it. They don't need to do anything else, right? Now, push-ups and dips do hit the front delt, however, it's nowhere near enough to make your shoulder actually stand out and pop, right? If you want an aesthetic V-taper physique, your shoulders are an area that you need to focus on, right? So you need to start training your shoulders directly. So basically the only option that we have is the pike push-up. You could also do the wall handstand push-up, however, the pike push-up is more accessible, so I would recommend you do those, right? So you can see on the screen how I do pike push-ups. I do them on rings, right? So what I want you to do is take a wider grip, because that way you actually work your side delts too. If you take a very close grip, you only work your front delts and your upper chest. However, when you take a wider grip, you also work the side delt. In terms of in terms of progressing, start with your hands and feet at the bottom, and basically the harder you want it to be, the closer you move your. So imagine these are your legs and these are your hands, right? The closer you want your legs to go to your hands, right? So you want to go make a steeper pike, basically. If that gets too easy, I would recommend you add a deficit. Basically, put your feet on top of something and buy yourself a couple of parallels or rings. And then you can have a bigger range of motion and a harder push, right? So let's move on to lats, right? So lats are a little bit more tricky because to be able to pick your lat exercise, you need to understand your body's planes of motions, right? So our body has three planes of motions. I'll show a picture right there. You have the frontal plane, the sagittal plane, and the transverse plane, right? So to hit your lats properly, you ideally want to pick two exercises. You want to pick one frontal plane movement and one sagittal plane movement. So frontal plane movements would be, in calisthenics we only have one, and that will be the wide grip pull-up. If you do it on a straight bar, on rings, or a wide neutral grip, doesn't really matter. Just it has to be a wide grip pull-up where your elbows are, wide from your body. Basically they flare out, right? Next exercise category would be the sagittal plane movement exercises. Those would be things like chin-ups, neutral grip pull-ups, and any kind of closed grip inverted row. Doesn't really matter if you do these exercises on rings or on normal bars, they still count as the same plane of motion, right? So if you have more time, pick two lat movements. If you have less time, just pick one and and focus on it, right? If you pick two, please make sure that they're in different planes of motion. So if you pick two, pick one frontal plane and one sagittal plane movement. Don't do two frontal plane movements or two sagittal plane movements. That is just a waste of time, right? So if you want to pick two, pick one frontal plane, for example, wide grip pull-up, and then one sagittal plane. So basically a closed grip inverted row, for example. However, if you have less time, I would recommend you to just do one movement. However, I would recommend you to have some kind of pull-up, right? So if you can do only one lat movement, I would not recommend you to do the row. I would recommend you to either do some kind of close grip pull-up, like the neutral grip pull-up or the chin-up, or just do the wide grip pull-up, right? Depends on, you can decide. Try them both and see what feels best. So next up is the upper back, and the upper back is actually a very, very simple muscle to train. So you have to understand its function first. Your upper back performs scapular retraction. Basically, it pulls your shoulder blades back, right? This is what the upper back does. By the way, your upper back are things like your upper traps, mid traps, rhomboids, and rear delts. So the basic way to train this is very simply horizontal pulls with a wide grip and flared elbows. So things like the face pull that's shown on screen right there, wide grip inverted rows with bars or rings. Those two exercises are basically going to be the only ones that you can do, right? But that's good because you can keep your upper back training very simple. For beginners, I would recommend to do the wide grip row. Basically, you do a wide grip inverted row, and that's it for your upper back. You don't have to do anything else. Very simple. So next up, we have bicep isolation, right? So you have to pick one bicep isolation exercise. Now, I'm gonna say this straightforward. This only works if you have rings or some kind of bands, like these resistance bands that you can get on Amazon, for example. If you don't have those things, don't worry. You don't have to do the bicep isolation. Your biceps will still grow. However, they're obviously not going to grow at the rate that they could, or that they had the potential to, right? So to do these exercises, you need rings. Now, the best exercise, in my opinion, is pelican curls by far. The problem is that they are very hard for beginners. So if you can't do pelican curls, start with ring bicep curls, and that's basically it. Those are the only two bicep isolation exercises that you can do with body weight. The other part of the arms isolation exercise is the triceps, so I recommend having one tricep isolation exercise. However, I have to say this with these isolation movements, if you don't have time, you can also skip them. These are optional, right? So your triceps will still grow from dips, push-ups, or pike push-ups. However, obviously not at the rate that it could grow if you would isolate it extra, right? So the best exercise for this, and this is basically the only one, are skull crushes, right? So pick a low bar and then basically do a body weight tricep extension. It's basically like I said, a body weight tricep extension. So in the gym, you will do a normal overhead tricep extension or like a tricep extension on the cables, right? However, here in calisthenics, we simply do them on these low bars, right? So the medial and lateral head of the triceps get hit enough during dips. However, the long head doesn't, and that's why we do this exercise, because this exercise hits the long head properly, right? This is probably going to be the only tricep exercise you will ever need. So last but not least, we're going to do one movement for the abs. So in my opinion, the best one is going to be the hanging leg raise, simply because it's the most accessible one. You can do it basically on every bar. If your calisthenics park has these sort of bars where they have like a rack of bars stacked on top of each other, I would do it on that one, simply because then your body isn't swinging around and it's easier to focus on the abs, right? When you do this, please make sure that you bring your legs above 90 degrees. Anything below that is just going to be hip flexor, and you're only going to be targeting hip flexor basically. So you want your legs to go as high as possible, right? If the hanging leg raise are too hard for you, I would recommend you do hanging knee raises. So basically, you do the same thing, but instead of doing it with your straight legs, just raise your knees up. Raise your knees up to your chest, basically. Right? Alternatives that you can do, if you don't want to do hanging leg raises, would be things like ab wheel rollouts, or if you're a complete beginner, I would recommend you do crunches, because hanging leg raises might be hard for you, even knee raises might be too hard for you. So crunches would probably be the best alternative. So as I said, at the end, I'm going to give you my volume guide. So basically, I'm going to teach you now how much volume you should do, how many sets, how many reps, etc. Right? So the basic standard that I use is I do 2 sets per exercise to failure, and I rest 3 minutes in between sets. You should do this for almost every exercise. However, for the isolation exercise, if you have less time or you want to minimize fatigue, you can even do 1 set to failure. Trust me when I tell you, 1 set to failure twice a week is surprisingly good. I know a lot of you guys won't believe it, but it does work. So, generally speaking, make your workout with all the things that I gave you, and then for every exercise that you pick, do 2 sets to failure, or for the isolations, you can also do 2 to 1 sets to failure, 3 minutes rest in between sets, 2 to 3 times a week. I want you, if you train upper body, you should train upper body 2 to 3 times a week. As for rep ranges, the most important thing for you is to fail. I know it sounds crazy, but if you want to gain muscle, failure is the most important thing. However, simply to minimize the uncomfortableness, I'll call it that way, right? Um, Try to find a difficulty level, right? Where you fail up until 15 reps, right? A perfect example would be pike push-ups. Once you notice that you can do 15 reps or more, simply move your legs closer to your hands. Or for example, with push-ups, if you can do 15 or like 15, 20 more push-ups, add a deficit and do deficit push-ups. Also play with the tempo, hold the bottom position, and yeah, things like that. Or you can add rings. Rings are also a great way to reduce your rep count, or in other words, make the exercise harder, right? So in conclusion, for the volume, 1 to 2 sets per exercise to failure. Try to fail before 15 reps. However, if you have to fail at like 30 reps, it's not that bad, really. The only thing that matters is failure. 1 to 2 sets to failure and 3 minutes rest in between sets, 2 to 3 times a week for your upper body day. That's it. You don't have to complicate it anymore. That's actually it for today's video. I hope that you learned a lot and you learned how to structure your upper body workout correctly now. Just a quick reminder, if you want a personalized workout schedule and weekly calls with me, hit the link in my bio and check out my community. Bye.